Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek Strange New World Season 1, Episode 2, Children of the Comet. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek Strange New World, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Strange New Worlds up to Season 1, Episode 2. Excuse me, if you have not seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So overall, another really impressive episode. It's funny because I felt like I was kind of preparing myself for a lesser episode, because I feel like every single Star Trek show will start with a great pilot, and then episode 2 will kind of not be that good. TNG, we got The Naked Now, which was absolutely horrendous. DS9, we got the episode Past Prologue, which I did not think was very good, and I thought they kind of fixed how they used the Bajorans in the later episodes of the season. Voyager, we got, I think it's called Parallax. It was an okay episode, but it had a character plot with B'Elanna trying to become chief engineer, but the main plot was some anomaly, BS nonsense. And Enterprise, well, I want to talk more about Enterprise second episode, because this actually reminded me a lot of it, but of course it was much better. So I was expecting an episode to not be that good, or, to be a bit of a downgrade, and it wasn't. It was amazing, and I'm really reinforced how different this show is from other new Star Trek shows. Honestly, I felt like, because this is the same creative team with Kiva Goldsman, Alex Kurtzman, and all of them, so when they were saying, oh, this is a return to form for, it's more like traditional episodic Star Trek, and those fans who have been unhappy with the new direction the newer shows will take will be relieved, will like this show better, and it will speak more to them. And I was like, yeah, that's all hot air BS. I kind of heard that before. You can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? Well, apparently they can, because it actually is true. What they're saying is actually true. Where I thought they were kind of mostly blowing hot air. I thought, okay, maybe this will feel a little bit like more like the original series or TNG than other new Trek shows, but it's still gonna feel like new Trek. I mean, it has some of those elements. It has a good use of cinematography. It has some of the quirkiness of the characters and whatnot. But yeah, it does feel like classic Trek a hell of a lot more than I thought it would. Now, I first I want to start off by addressing some of these naysayers, because honestly, and this is just my honest opinion, I feel like there are certain people who had already decided that any new Star Trek show that comes out, that, especially if it's produced by Alex Kurtzman and Secret Hideout, is gonna suck. They've already predetermined this in their mind. So when it's released, they'll watch it and they will come up with reasons and excuses to fit that narrative that they already decided that would exist. That, frankly, there's just no pleasing some people. And you know what? This has been true of all new Star Trek shows that have been released. TNG had its detractors. DS9 had a lot of vocal detractors. Voyager, Enterprise. So it's nothing new, but here's the thing, they're not going to like this show no matter what you do. You could produce the grade A best Star Trek show that ever existed, and they still would find some excuses to not like it, which is fine. You just got to ignore people like that. They're always going to be there. They're always going to exist. But I want to address one in particular. This one critic, if you can even call him that, stated that this particular person also really hated Discovery and Picard and Lower Decks and everything else, and he stated that this show is it's just copying the original series, and it's not creative enough and not original. It's just giving me things I've seen before, which I find fucking rich. Seeing how they were complaining about those other shows too much because they were too new and not Star Trek. Those were this particular person's specific words, not Star Trek enough, breaks canon, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't feel like Star Trek is defying what Star Trek stands for. And so when they get a show that keeps canon, that totally feels like Star Trek and totally keeps in line with Star Trek's vision, then they pivot back to, well, this is just more of the same. Which, ironically, I'm pretty sure the same person also liked the Orville, and that was just a copy ripoff of Star Trek. But here's the thing. So the counter argument to what I just said would be, well, you're seeing things in a binary thing. You're seeing things in the extremes. Like, you can either have something that's totally different, or you can either have something that's totally the same, where I want something more in the middle. But the problem with that counter argument is, I would argue that it is not accurate to Strange New Worlds, because Strange New Worlds, I would very strongly argue, is in fact in the fucking middle. And the arguments that the guy was saying that Strange New Worlds is just a copy of stuff we've seen before is actually wrong. I mean, yes, it feels more like Star Trek, which is what this guy wanted, but it also feels new and different. It is combining the newer feel of the action orientated, the great cinematography, the more sort of quirky, upbeat type characters that weren't really present as much in classic Trek, which are all elements of new Trek, and it's combining that with elements of classic Trek to create something original and new, but has that same feel as Star Trek. So again, I go back to my original thesis that some people will find excuses, and I'm not even going to cover the whole it's too woke thing. That's just like, that doesn't even deserve a response. It is so pathetic and inaccurate. Because, Star Trek has always from the very first fucking episode, always been woke. But anyway, relative to the time period it's been released in. Now, so I shouldn't even bother addressing that nonsense. But yeah, people will just find excuses because they've already decided, like, in their minds, that maybe, I'm sure many of them are not aware of this, but they've already predetermined that they will not, under any circumstance, like any new Star Trek show. And so when a new Star Trek show comes out, they will find reasons, excuses, BS excuses that actually don't hold up, to convince themselves that they're actually judging it on its own merits and that it's not good, but really it's already predetermined in their mind. No matter what they do, they're not going to like it. So as I said, I say the best thing is just ignore those people, but then I just spent like 5 minutes talking about them. But still, I felt like I just wanted to address that. Because, I don't know, we're only 2 episodes in, but this show is fucking amazing. Like, I think it as easily could be my favorite season of all of the newer Star Trek. Every season that came out since Discovery first started. Like, even more than Lower Decks. Although, because, as much as I like Lower Decks, which was previously my favorite show, I did have some issues with it. And, I'm having less issues with Strange New Worlds. Now, granted, as I said, only 2 episodes in, so I shouldn't be jumping the gun too much. But if, like, the promotional material and these first 2 episodes are any indication, it's indicating that the season is going to continue on this upward trajectory. Now, maybe I'll end up eating my words like I did with Picard Season 2, because I actually spoke highly of that in its first 2 episodes. And that turned out to be an unmitigated disaster. But I have higher hopes for Strange New Worlds. I would really be beyond shocked if this season let me down, especially the way that Picard Season 2 did. Everything indicates that this is going to be an amazing season. Now, let me get more into this episode specifically. So I mentioned it reminds me a lot of the second episode of Enterprise, which I believe was called Fight or Flight, because that episode dealt with Hoshi and her trepidation of joining Starfleet and how she felt like Starfleet wasn't the right thing for her, and she felt like maybe she wasn't ready to be out in space, and it called on her to use her linguistic skills to sort of save the day, and like the Enterprise crew were dependent on her to interpret these strange alien languages, and she managed to use her skills and pull it out for them and prove to herself that she deserved to be here. Now, if that sounds extremely familiar after watching this episode, it's pretty much the same thing for Uhura. They did that storyline where she had her doubts if Starfleet was the right place for her. They played on that more than the S, because with Hoshi it was more of, should I be in space, because the whole thing of space travel and Starfleet was new to everyone, and so she didn't feel like she was ready for that. But with Uhura, it was less about being in space and more specifically about being in Starfleet. That was her decision misguided because it was sort of guided by tragedy, which, by the way, I love. We get more backstory in Uhura in this one episode than we did in the entire original series and movies. But anyway, so it is very similar in this regard. However, I think it's far superior, far better. It's like they took a concept. You'd be like, well, Mark, you're just complaining that like Orville and shit is just doing shit that's been done before. Isn't that what this episode is doing? Well, no, because this episode is taking a theme that's been used before, but it's improving upon it, where the Orville just regurgitates it and most of the time makes it less quality, not greater quality. And plus, this is adding its own original spin to it. Like, what this episode and the entire show has, that episode of Enterprise and the entire show of Enterprise, especially the first 2 seasons, what that lacked, what this show has, is chemistry. A group of dynamic, very interesting characters that interact with each other in a very interesting way. That was to say that was lacking in Enterprise is a bit of an understatement. And that was what mainly held that episode back, because although they were presenting the concept story they were presenting with Hoshi was an interesting concept, I just didn't think they sold it to me, because Hoshi did not really come off as a 3-dimensional character, and I did not buy her camaraderie with the rest of the crew or interactions with Archer. It seemed kind of stilted. Whereas here, it's a hell of a lot more animated. You buy the chemistry between her and Uhura and Pike. Like, that whole dinner scene was amazing. And I love how, Pike tells the story about, like, when he was chasing a Nausicaan without any pants and tripped over his pants and saying that you have to laugh. I love how that tied into the theme of the episode. This is why it feels like classic Trek, because classic Trek did an amazing job of making like stuff like that purposeful and creating a theme for each episode that like they followed through. This is why this show is amazing. And then not only Pike, but also Una, her, interactions with Uhura, and of course, Spock. Now, granted, Neon did not have much to do in this episode, which is fine. Not every character is going to be a highlight of every single episode. She had more to do last episode, and I'm sure she'll have more to do in future episodes as well. But you got that sense of her sort of interaction, her being sort of the hard nose. And I kind of love how when Samuel Kirk, who I'm still iffy about, by the way, someone said he kind of reminds him of Sam Rockwell's character from Galaxy Quest. I totally see that. But anyway, so I didn't mind that he got knocked out right away. But once he did get knocked out, Uhura was kind of this lighthearted character amongst these more stern characters of Nan and Deanna, or however you say her name, and Spock. And that's actually made a really interesting dynamic. And I love how that thing of Spock trying to give her a pep talk. He's like, "Is that your version of a pep talk?" But then he says that you can do better, and it's like, okay, that's a much better pep talk. You're improving. Like, those are beautiful moments. Like, you feel the chemistry between these characters, and even the scenes on the bridge with Pike and Number One and Ortega. Again, you got this really like beautiful blend of character chemistry. I'm like, you got more character chemistry than okay, let me put it this way. Star Trek Strange New Worlds has more character dynamic and chemistry in one finger than Enterprise does in its entire body. Like, let me make that comparison. So you really bought the character interactions on the bridge scenes, and then when they introduced this alien, they were intimidating. You bought them as aliens. And I love and it's not that original concept, particularly in science fiction in general, to have an alien race who's dogmatic and very sort of a religious extremist to an unreasonable degree, which is kind of ironic how he asked Pike if he was a reasonable man when these beings were being completely unreasonable. I do like that, but it worked really well. Like, they didn't appear that much in this episode, but they didn't need to. You immediately got a sense of who they are, and they felt real and dynamic, and they felt like a good threat, like a big threat that would be hard for the Enterprise crew to overcome, which is exactly the kind of storytelling that you want. So I dare say that this episode is the best second episode of any Star Trek series out there. And I don't even talk about Discovery's second episode. That was total crap. And in Lower Deck's second episode, I remember it being a little bit of a letdown too. So this is, I know it's a weird thing to rank, but still, this is the first episode number 2 that I've seen in Star Trek that actually succeeds. In my opinion, of course. And then, of course, the whole storyline of horror finding out its music. That's true to the classic character of a horror, who we saw is very musical. Is one of the few traits that they did make very clear that she had in the original series. And so I love that they used that in this plot and made it relevant, and her musical skills is what really helped like save the day. I thought was brilliant. And of course I love how they had Spock sort of laughing, which some people I could see getting their panties in a twist over that one, but if you watch The Cage, Spock smiles. So saying that Spock was a bit more in touch with his feelings before Kirk's time and during Pike's time is actually consistent with canon, so I will say on those people. I loved it. I thought it actually worked, and I liked how it tied back to Pike's story and again the whole theme of the episode. This episode was amazing. So that's 2 for 2 so far, so that's why I have such high hopes for this season. And the fact that it's episodic, again, is what I would separate it from Picard, even though that had a great start with his first 2 episodes and then went to total shit in season 2. That was a serialized one story, so it was more, you couldn't really judge those first 2 episodes of how things would go, but I think this being episodic, you can. And I love how they're tying it back. They're exploring, Pike's trepidation of the fact he knows the future, and I think Una made some great arguments. Now, again, I'll address some critics, because some critics are saying, oh, well, why doesn't Pike just try to change the future? Those people weren't paying attention during the Discovery episode when he went to Borath, because the Klingon dude there made it very fucking clear that if he agreed to take the time crystal, there would be no changing of the future whatsoever. So he's kind of accepted the fact that there is no way to change it. And of course, they don't want to break canon. We know that it won't change either. But the funny thing is that we know, if you've seen the Menagerie from the original series, we know that Pike does in fact have a happy ending, that his life does end on a happy note, which he's not aware of. Which I think is a really interesting dynamic, because he's just saying, oh my god, I'm going to turn into this horrible, disfigured, paralyzed, like almost vegetable state, unable to move person. What he doesn't realize is that he's actually going to spend the rest of his life on Talos with the woman he loves, and be happy and have the illusion of being healthy again. Like, so I think watching Star Trek and having that knowledge brings this whole storyline a new dynamic, which I love. But yeah, those people were saying, oh, why doesn't he just try to change it? Because he knows. He's been told flat out. Now, Una still suggests that maybe he can try to change it, that maybe there's still a way. So she is addressing that. But I'm surprised he didn't mention the fact that, you know, he kind of mentioned, he did say that he chose, because he did, by choosing to take the time crystals, he chose, it was inevitable that that future was going to happen. But how, and he also says that he doesn't want to change it because he remembers the names of all those Starfleet cadets that he's going to save, and we see him at the end of the episode looking them up, and they're still kids at this point. Which I thought was really touching, and so he doesn't want to change it because he doesn't want to, he would rather sacrifice himself to save those people. He doesn't want to help himself at the cost of killing all those cadets or letting them die. Of course, Una suggests there's a way, possibly a way that he could do both, but I think he knows that that's not going to happen. But again, it's interesting knowing that we have that extra knowledge that he only has part of the information of its future, not the whole thing, and that actually makes it different. That's really interesting to think about. God, I just love this show. So my rating for Children of the Comet out of 10 is going to be another 9. Excellent. It's another amazing show. Amazing cast of characters with great chemistry. It's a great exploration of Uhura's character. It was a great plot. They had very threatening villains. I didn't even talk about the fact that they saved like an entire world of people. Like, it's just a really good episode. And plus the way they handle the Prime Directive is kind of more in line with, because people had a lot of complaints about how TNG handled the Prime Directive. Because I can almost imagine Picard and TNG being like, oh, we can't stop the Comet because we got to maintain the Prime Directive. But Pike even said outright in this episode, we can't interfere with less developed species, but we're not going to let them die. Which is more in line with what fans wanted the Prime Directive to be. They didn't like, a lot of people in mind, myself included, that the Prime Directive is a great idea and they should have it, but it shouldn't be as staunch like some of the ways it was utilized in TNG, particularly with Picard letting a whole race of people die rather than interfering was the incorrect way to use it and made it a bad thing. So they're course correcting that in the series and being like, yes, we can't interfere, but we're not going to let them die, which makes sense. That is the way the Prime Directive should be used. So, god damn it, I like this episode. So anyway, that is it for my review of Strange New Worlds, Season 1, Episode 2. I shall be back next week and every week after. Hopefully this show maintains this quality, which I really, really think it will. And you can also check out my channel as I cover all things Star Trek. I also cover other shows like Better Call Saul, Star Wars Rebels, The Expanse, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.